draw is not magic, but there are always typical difficulties that beginners have to deal with. In this video, I'm going to show you 8 exercises that might make it a little easier for you to get started. Hello, nice to have you back at Art for Everybody. If you've never been here before, my name is Evi Steiner-Böhm. I'm an artist from Germany, and these 2 little figures here are called Pedro and Rosa, and they accompany you through my videos here on YouTube. And now, without further ado, let's get going and do some exercises. Let's start right away with the first exercise, which is about holding the pencil correctly, because everyone who has learned to write first gets used to a certain way to hold the pencil. And there is no right way, of course, just the way that suits your own hands. But at the moment when we not only want to write, but also draw shapes, it can of course be that this original way of holding the pencil is a hindrance. That's why it makes sense to first observe yourself and try out the different ways of holding the pencil. When you write, your hand usually rests on the paper and you either hold the pencil like this, or some people hold it like that, or some like this. Now let's just see how you can control the pencil when your hand is resting on the paper. Next, we'll try holding the pencil a little differently. Maybe further back, or maybe holding it like that. Just trying out different ways. My hand is now still on the paper. I hold the pencil further back, and then I try to make larger lines and see how I can manage that. Or I hold the pencil completely flat, which actually makes it easier and easier to draw. Then you can try taking your hand off the paper and see if you can still create straight lines. And if you can't do that anymore, it makes sense to practice it. When drawing, you often need such lines when you are doing a large format. Then you can of course combine that with the gesture you use when writing. A variety of structures and shapes can be created simply by the way you hold the pencil. When drawing, it makes sense to follow the shape with the line, and we therefore call that a form line. Now this is an exercise you can do, for example, very easily when you're on the phone or watching TV. The point here is simply to practice putting lines next to each other, to make them a little bit further apart, perhaps to make them more dense, but in a way that they always follow some form. You can also practice curves. I'm making curved lines now. Always make sure that the form line is as consistent as possible. You can also try waves or work with interruptions like that. This is mainly a matter of concentration, which you will need later. For example, if you want to make a rope or braids. This is a very good exercise for that. Try to make the strokes as even as possible so that a shape is created. But of course you can see that with me now, if I hold the pencil further away, I no longer have as good control and my lines are no longer even. But I know that this is simply due to my lack of motor skills. That's why I couldn't become a brain surgeon, obviously. You can complete this exercise by adding half lines next to the form lines. And this is extremely useful for drawing trees. With these form lines, you can create the illusion that something is leaning forward or backward. As I said, you can do this really well while watching TV and do it again and again without paying too much attention to it. And over time, you can do it automatically. The most common mistake beginners make is when they have to shade an object from light to dark. It doesn't matter whether they use hatching or whatever. When you tell them, create a smooth transition from light to dark, at a certain point they start to shade the whole thing dark. And then such hard edges arise. Of course, if I want to draw an apple with light and shadow, for example, this is far too hard. This means that I need a very gentle transition from light to dark or from dark to light. And learning this is also purely a matter of practice. This also can be done wonderfully while watching television. Simply draw any shape and then use lines, or you can also do it with curls like this. Just try to shade from dark to light or from light to dark without creating such hard edges. I'm going to continue the fourth exercise on this sheet because I've already started a bit with it. And here we work with the so-called curling technique. You simply always make curls like that, but really hold the pencil as far back as possible and your hand as far away from the paper as possible. You can also sketch some objects a bit. I'll now make a small pot. And then we try to shade it with these curls. This is a really good exercise to help your hand become calmer when it's so far away from the paper. You can also create a kind of line by making these curls very small and very narrow. But because you're so far away from the paper, you can't do these hard edges anymore. That's why this is a very good exercise to learn to create smooth transitions. This exercise is about tricking our brain, because normally, when we've never practiced drawing, we've learned a three-dimensional picture of an object. Let's, for example, take this teddy bear. We have looked at it from all directions, we have touched it, we've learned how it can turn and what it looks from behind. And if you have to draw it now, you have to go from the three-dimensional to the two-dimensional level. And then it often happens that our brain intervenes and says, "No, I know better. It looks completely different." And in order to force the brain to really look and observe exactly what it sees, I like to do this in my courses by saying, cover your paper and only draw what you see. You don't know anymore that this is supposed to be a fur, but these are just some lines. Watch how they go up there, in which direction they move, because especially with a fur, many people tend to draw it too evenly. But now I'm forced to draw it as I see it on that small piece. I don't know that it's supposed to be a teddy bear. I just know that the lines should be mixed up like this. Then you just make the motif more and more visible until you have traced the entire motif. If it still doesn't work, you can also use the trick from the book by Betty Edwards, Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain. You turn your motif upside down because then the brain is even more confused and even more forced to really just concentrate on what it is seeing. You just see two black spots and a pattern next to them, and you're forced to really learn to draw it the way it looks on the two-dimensional plane. For this exercise, I have now put up a small still life in front of me, and you can do this exercise in different ways. I usually do it by letting the students choose 2 different colored pencils, but you can also do it with just one pencil. It works there too, but it doesn't look quite as interesting. And we now draw the contours blindly, which means we take the first pencil and without looking on the paper, simply draw what we see. It's not about whether that's true at all, but about tricking the brain and telling it, no, you do not know what that looks like. And above all, you can't draw it yet, and we'll try now. Now just do that and scan the entire motif step by step, as if you have never seen anything like this before. You can also set the lines apart, but I usually do it in one line. But always try as much as possible to put all the objects that you see on the paper in some form. The same thing again, and now we take the other pencil. We keep our eyes only on the motif again. You can now also start higher up, for example, and I'm now doing the same thing again with the green pen. This time I'm setting the lines apart so you can see that that works too. You can also be very brave, doesn't matter, even if you draw outside of the paper. It's just a matter of somehow drawing these lines that you see. And if you feel like it, you can now also somehow color the shapes that you recognize. This often makes really beautiful drawings that are simply interesting as a drawing, even if they are not representational at all. This is an exercise that I do quite often before we actually draw figuratively. It's again taken from Betty Edwards' book, and I can only recommend that to you. Now, this is about drawing negative spaces. I especially like to do this when we start drawing people, because that's where it's most useful. Negative spaces means that I'm not interested in the body at all, but rather I draw the space that I see in between. This means that when I draw now, I just concentrate on what I see of the white here, and that goes along the head, up the shoulder, and then inside where the little ball is. I have to follow the contours of the figure, but because I concentrate on the space outside it, this way it's easier for me to depict the movement of the figure. And I'm also learning to better assess the length ratios. From my perspective, it's a little hard right now because I don't see the figure in front of me, but I wanted it to be next to me so that you can see better what I mean. And here again, draw the space and not the arm. Of course, you can do this with all other motifs too. For example, with the still life that I just displayed. And by the way, I'll upload the photos in the community area where you can download them. Then you can follow the exercises directly with me. My last suggestion is to work with stencils. I know from experience that it makes sense to draw a motif not just once, but over and over again. This gives you the security that then flows into the final work. For beginners, however, it's often the case that the second or third attempt is worse than the first one, because maybe your concentration or the enthusiasm has waned. That's why I often have them make stencils from such simple objects. You can easily make one yourself. Simply make an outline drawing and then either blacken the back a bit with a pencil so that you can trace the drawing, or you can also use chalk for that. And then do the same motif over and over again. It is actually the case that just by tracing the contours, a certain workflow is imprinted in the brain. Even if you trace someone else's drawing, it's like making a path in the jungle. And this is how the brain learns how to draw such objects. Over time, you can perhaps make the preliminary drawing less and less detailed. Above all, you can make a lot of these preliminary drawings and try them out with different kinds of hatching without too much of an effort. This way, you learn what comes easiest to you. Some people like cross-hatching, others like to do the curling technique, or someone likes to do very small short strokes. With stencils, you have the invaluable advantage that you don't have to go back to the preliminary drawing every time, but that you can now concentrate on what you want to try out. And with that, I've come to the end. I hope these were useful suggestions for you, and I'm looking forward to the next video with you. Until then, have a very good time. See you soon.